My name is Carol. I'm 69 years old. I want to talk about something that took me an embarrassingly long time to admit. When Frank and I planned our retirement, we followed all the standard rules. We saved what we could from every single paycheck. We paid down the mortgage on this house. We calculated our expected Social Security benefits down to the dollar. We thought we had everything perfectly figured out. Any financial planner would have looked at our numbers and given us a gold star. They sold us a very specific picture of how this phase of life is supposed to look. You finish your career. You take up golf or gardening. You spend your fixed income on sunsets and beach walks. It all sounds so incredibly lovely on paper. It's also completely disconnected from the reality I actually woke up to. When I finally retired from the school district, I stepped into a life that looked absolutely nothing like those brochures. Frank died in October of 2019. It was a Saturday. He was just mowing the lawn, and suddenly I was doing the retirement math entirely for one. I was sitting at the kitchen table looking at our budget. I was figuring out what survivor benefits actually meant in practice. I realized the plans we made together had to stretch in ways we never ever discussed. And everywhere I looked, people were giving advice that just didn't apply to my life anymore. They were talking about optimizing tax strategies for couples. They were talking about finding your ultimate purpose together. Meanwhile, I was just trying to figure out how to fill a very quiet Tuesday afternoon alone. The advice felt hollow. It felt written for people who had perfect control over how their lives turned out. Life doesn't work like a spreadsheet. Frank loved spreadsheets. He really did. But even his couldn't account for what actually happens when the plan gets thrown out the window. I had to stop listening to the experts. I had to unlearn almost everything I thought I knew about being retired. The worst part was this constant, quiet panic. I thought maybe I was doing it all completely wrong. You wake up and it's a Thursday morning. You have absolutely nowhere you are required to be. The house is completely silent. That feels profoundly unsettling. Not good weird, just weird. I thought I was failing at retirement because I wasn't thrilled every single morning. I felt incredibly guilty about it. I had my teaching pension. The house was paid off. I was fine on paper. But I kept waiting for that magical feeling of endless freedom everyone talks about. Instead, it just felt like a Tuesday that never ended. I spent months feeling like I missed a crucial memo. Everyone else seemed to have the secret to a perfect retirement. I was the only one stuck in my living room. I was just trying to figure out what to do with myself. I kept reading these advice columns in magazines. They just made me feel significantly worse. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system today. I don't have one. I'm just going to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you what I figured out when I finally stopped trying to follow everyone else's rules. I had to throw the rule book away entirely. I was sitting right here in this living room armchair. It was Frank's chair before it became my filming chair. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November. It was about 6 months after I officially retired. I had this stack of mail sitting on the small side table. It was right next to my reading glasses. Most of the mail was junk, but there was a letter from the Social Security Administration. There was also a glossy magazine about maximizing your golden years. I opened the magazine first. The cover story was about a couple who bought a massive RV. They were touring all the national parks. Frank and I had a plan to see the national parks. He even built a very detailed spreadsheet for it. Looking at that magazine, I just felt this deep, heavy wave of total exhaustion. The article was full of aggressive tips. It told me how to embrace my newfound freedom. It told me to invest heavily in my hobbies. I didn't want a new hobby. I wanted my husband back. I put the magazine down on the table. I looked at the Social Security letter instead. It was a standard notice about my survivor benefit. The amount was $1,890 a month. It was practical. It was real math. It was exactly the kind of thing Frank would have filed away in his green folder. Sitting there, I held that glossy magazine in one hand. I held that gray government letter in the other. It hit me hard. The magazine was selling a complete fantasy. The letter was my actual everyday life. I was trying to force myself into a retirement mold that didn't fit my reality. The advice out there is built for people whose plans went perfectly. When your plan breaks, you have to write your own rules. I realized I had been carrying around this enormous weight. I was trying to live up to a standard that simply didn't exist. It was completely exhausting. It took me a while to sort out what was actually useful. I had to figure out what was just noise. I threw away a lot of what I had been told. So I want to go through 5 things I've noticed. 5 pieces of standard retirement advice I simply stopped believing. Things I really wish someone had told me sooner. I spent so much time worrying that I was doing this wrong. Maybe you're carrying that same weight. You really don't need to be. The first thing I stopped believing is that you have to travel to be doing retirement right. The brochures make it seem absolutely mandatory for your happiness. If you aren't on a river cruise, you're failing. If you aren't exploring Europe, you're wasting your precious time. My daughter Jen called me a few months after I retired. She lives up in Charlotte. It's about 90 minutes away. She's a marketing director. She's a born fixer. She likes to manage things. She said, "Mom, you need to book a trip. You're just sitting in the house." I argued with her for about 10 minutes, but she wore me down. So I booked a trip. I packed a small suitcase. I drove down to a beautiful bed and breakfast in Charleston. I stayed for 3 days. It was perfectly lovely. The room had a 4-poster bed. The food was good. The weather was remarkably nice for that time of year. But I spent the whole 3 days acutely aware that I was eating every meal alone. I sat at a small table near a large window in the dining room. I drank my tea. I watched other older couples having coffee. They were reading the paper together. They were doing the crossword. I kept seeing things I wanted to point out to Frank. I saw a vintage car he would have loved. I saw a bridge he would have analyzed. Then I kept remembering I couldn't tell him. I came home more exhausted than when I left. I pulled into the driveway. I unpacked my suitcase. I just sat on the edge of the bed. That's when I figured out that travel is not a magic cure. It doesn't fix feeling lost. Sometimes packing a suitcase just means taking your quiet house to a different zip code. I don't feel the need to collect passport stamps right now. Frank retired first, and he was happy. We had that grand plan to travel together. When he died, the plan died too. Jen told me to go take those trips anyway. I think she meant well. But I like my house. I like sleeping in my own bed. Letting go of the pressure to be a globetrotter was an enormous relief. I realized I don't have to prove I'm enjoying my retirement to anyone. I don't need photos in front of monuments to validate my life. That leads me to the second piece of advice I threw out entirely. The idea that you need to find a grand, defining purpose. Every article tells you to volunteer for 10 different charity boards. They tell you to start a second career or a small business. They insist you must leave a massive, visible legacy. It's exhausting just reading about it. I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary for years. I had 30 children in my room every single year. I knew all their names. I knew their parents. I was a curriculum coordinator for the county after that. I spent decades making sure things ran smoothly. My whole life was scheduled by school bells. I lived by administrative meetings. I did my part for the community. I gave it 40 years of my life. But I felt this lingering guilt in retirement. I worried my days weren't productive enough. I felt like I was wasting time. I tried joining a local neighborhood planning committee. I thought it would be a very good use of my time. I put on a nice blouse. I drove to the community center. I sat through exactly 2 meetings. The arguments were incredibly petty. They spent a full hour arguing about sidewalk widths on Main Street. One man brought in a ruler. I actually laughed out loud during the second meeting. I just couldn't help it. I excused myself to use the restroom. I didn't go to the restroom. I just went out to my car. I drove straight home. I made myself a cup of tea. That's when I figured out that living a quiet life is enough. A simple, decent life is a completely valid purpose. I don't fully understand why our culture insists we must be productive forever. I'm done participating in it. Some days my only purpose is keeping my houseplants alive. I have a small plant right over there on the shelf behind me. Keeping that thing green feels like a major accomplishment. It really does. I make sure I eat a vegetable. I make sure I check the mail. I don't need a plaque with my name on it. I don't need a committee chair title to validate my Tuesday. Being okay is an achievement all on its own. The third thing I stopped believing is the standard advice about money. Not the math itself, but the attitude around spending it. You hear a lot of talk about living large in your golden years. You're supposed to treat yourself constantly because you can't take it with you. Frank was a civil engineer. He calculated absolutely everything. He had a spreadsheet for everything we bought. My total monthly income now is $3,130. That's my teaching pension. It's also the survivor benefit combined. My fixed expenses run about $1,444 a month. The math works out fine. I'm comfortable. I know I'm luckier than many widows my age. I put about $800 into savings every month. I don't touch it. But my older sister Patty told me I should remodel the kitchen. She lives up in Indianapolis. Her husband died 8 years ago. She's my advanced scout for widowhood. She said I needed to freshen things up. She said I deserved a modern space. I looked at the cost of a remodel. I got 2 estimates from local contractors. It was absolutely terrifying. I like my kitchen fine. I don't want granite countertops. I don't care about stainless steel appliances. What I want is peace of mind. I want to know I have a buffer if the roof leaks. I need to know I can fix my car if the transmission fails. That's when I figured out that feeling secure is valuable. It's significantly more valuable than having new cabinets. Frank would have had an opinion about this. Spending thousands on cupboards that already hold plates perfectly well is silly. He would have hated it, actually. He would have crossed his arms and shaken his head. I stick to my spreadsheet. It says Carol's numbers at the top now. But it's the exact same format he built. That predictability lets me sleep at night. I keep about $886 as spending money each month. I don't need to spend it just because I can. The numbers give me a boundary. I happen to like boundaries. The fourth thing I stopped believing is that you must say yes to everything. The advice columnists always warn you about isolation. They tell you to join every single club. They tell you to say yes to every dinner party invitation. They treat solitude like a disease you have to fight off constantly. I tried that for a few months. I joined a neighborhood book club. I went to Wednesday night potlucks at the church. I was absolutely exhausted. I felt like I was performing all the time. One Wednesday, it was pouring rain. It was cold and miserable outside. I really didn't want to go to the potluck. I had made a green bean casserole. I was standing in my hallway holding this warm casserole dish. I had my coat on. I had my car keys in my hand. I just put the dish down on the table. I took my coat off. I realized I was only going because I felt obligated. I called my brother Thomas over in Bloomington. I told him I was feeling incredibly guilty for skipping church supper. He came to Frank's funeral and gave me good advice then. He gave me good advice now. He told me I'm a grown woman. He said I could eat cereal for dinner if I wanted to. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. That's when I figured out that forced socializing is worse than being alone. I need connection, yes, but I need meaningful connection. I do not just need noise in a room. Making new friends in your late 60s is harder than it sounds. You don't have the energy for small talk anymore. Frank was the planner. I did the conversations. When he died, I inherited the quiet. I have my son David calling from Portland every Sunday. He asks about Frank. I appreciate that more than he knows. He's the only one who asks regularly. I text with my granddaughter Ella. I talk to Patty on Thursdays. That's enough for me. I don't have to fill every single silence with small talk. I'm allowed to just sit in my own living room. The final thing I stopped believing is that downsizing is mandatory. The conventional wisdom is that a big house is a terrible burden. They tell you to sell it the minute you retire, or worse, the minute you become a widow. They tell you to buy a condo and simplify your life. I've thought about selling this house quarterly since Frank died. The market is very good here in Greenville. Houses sell in a weekend. I can afford the property taxes. I can afford the insurance. The utilities are manageable. But everyone makes you feel foolish for keeping a family home alone. They act like you're hoarding empty rooms. I had a real estate agent knock on my door last spring. He was wearing a very sharp suit. He left a glossy flyer about right-sizing your retirement. I sat at my kitchen table with that flyer for an hour. I looked at the pictures of modern condos. I thought about the spare bedrooms upstairs. I thought about the yard Frank used to mow. I thought about the maintenance. I almost called the agent. I had my hand on the phone. But then I looked out the kitchen window. I know my neighbors. I know their kids. I know the exact creak the front step makes when the mailman comes. Moving felt like a massive disruption. It felt like a disruption just for the sake of following standard advice. That's when I figured out that staying put is a valid choice. Sometimes the effort of moving is far heavier than the effort of vacuuming an empty room. I might sell eventually. I'm asking this out loud because I still don't know. But I'm not doing it right now just because an article told me to. The peace of mind of my own four walls is worth the heating bill. The work of retirement is actually constructing a life you want to live in. It requires effort. It doesn't just happen to you. Expecting it to be effortless sets you up for disappointment. Once I accepted that I still had to manage my days, the anxiety lifted. It became a project instead of a failure. I'm not going to pretend I have it all figured out. I don't. Some days the quiet in this house is still very loud. Other days I feel a quiet sort of pride. I'm managing it all by myself. I didn't get the retirement I planned. No amount of generic advice was going to fix that. The we became I. That changes absolutely everything. But I'm building a life that makes sense for me right now. It's not perfect. It isn't a brochure. But it is mine, and mostly it's okay. I think it's important to admit that. If you found yourself nodding along to any of this, leave a comment. Specifically, what's one piece of common retirement advice that you tried to follow, but it just didn't work for your actual life? What did you end up throwing out? I read through those comments. I find it incredibly helpful to know I'm not the only one ignoring the experts. It helps me more than you might realize. It really does. I know there are a lot of channels out there telling you how to be perfectly happy. That isn't what this is. This is just us talking about what is actually happening. We talk about the real stuff here. We talk about the things nobody warns you about. If you're dealing with the new math of doing this on your own, consider subscribing. We figure it out together. Okay, I think that's what I wanted to say. Thanks for being here.